الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وآله وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم رب زدنا علما. اللهم أرنا حقائق الأشياء كما هي. اللهم أرنا حقائق الأشياء كما هي. Okay, so Hallaq. We have been reading Hallaq. So we had stopped here. Yeah. So until the early 19th century, and for 12 centuries before then, the moral law of Islam, whatever it means, we discussed a bit on. The Sharia had successfully negotiated customary law and local customary practice, and had emerged as the supreme moral and legal force regulating both society and government. Where's the state? Anyway, we'll just leave it for now and move on. The law was paradigmatic, having been accepted as a central system. And law is an English word. What Islam has is fiqh. So the law was paradigmatic, having been accepted as a central system of high and general norms by societies and the dynastic powers that ruled over them, because they were all Muslims. So and most Khalifas, even if they didn't raise to the level of Al-Khulafa Rashidun, most Umayyad and Abbasi Khulafa until later were scholars of Islam. They were mujtahideen, like Mansur. He's Imam Malik's friend, his childhood buddy. He was, if he wasn't Amirul Mu'mineen, he would have been probably a scholar of the same level as Imam Malik, for example. So it was a moral law that, so these are very suspect terms, moral law. We'll get to that. It was a moral law. If I quibble with every word, then we won't go anywhere. So I'll just want to flag that and move on. It was a moral law that created and maintained a well-ordered society. To borrow John Rawls' effective expression. And I think mention of John Rawls here is not accidental, because probably he is going to read some sort of a political liberalism into the Islamic history, political liberalism of John Rawls, which is kufr, obviously. If Islam rejects anything, that is John Rawls' philosophy. Whether his earlier philosophy or later philosophy, whether metaphysical liberalism or political liberalism, they are kufr, as we have been showing elsewhere. So what is well-ordered society of John Rawls? So he's referring to political liberalism, page 35. We'll look at it in a minute. But I just noted in his glossary that for Mazahib al-Arba, fiqhi mazahib, he uses the legal. So he doesn't use fiqh, legal schools. Those are not legal schools. There is a law derived from the school, but they are not legal school. Fiqh. Law, fiqh is not law. Fiqh is a comprehensive thing. And even if we are talking about al-fiqh al-asghar and we exclude al-fiqh al-akbar, you can't equate al-fiqh with law or moral law. You derive law from fiqh, but fiqh is the whole way of life. has rules and regulations and manners and etiquettes for the whole life, not just, legal or moral rules. Anyway, at some point we will define fiqh, and we will define law, and we will try to compare them. Okay. So what is Rawls' well-ordered society? Obviously, his concept of well-ordered society was first elaborated in theory of justice, but he is referring to political liberalism, so we'll look at that. Okay, so let's look at Rawls' well-ordered society. What does it mean? It was a moral law that created and maintained a well-order. Not just moral law. Let's see. So these are general principles of the first one of Rawls' conception of well-ordered society. Everyone accepts acceptance can be acceptance based on the belief that those principles are the true principle. Acceptance can be pragmatic, so we would have to, for example, so it needs to be in an Islamic society. Obviously, there are always a level of people's understanding and their acceptance of principles of justice. Firstly, we would have to accept that Islamic society is based on principles of justice. Fundamentally, but we will contest that point because justice is always secondary to metaphysical beliefs. And obviously then the conception of justice itself is different, because political liberalism's justice is zulm as far as Islamic principles of al-adl wal-ihsan is concerned. That's two things. The first thing is need to figure out acceptance. Obviously, even though acceptance has different levels in Islamic society as well, but there is two different conceptions of acceptance: iman and pragmatic acceptance. You can have acceptance based on opportunistic acceptance, and I'm sure if we spend more time, we'll come up with more examples or more types of acceptance. So there's this needs in Rawls's so-called well-ordered society. The first principle has this ambiguity, obviously, which needs to be clarified if it is to be applied to Islamic conception of a well-ordered society. Okay. The second thing is Islamic society is not based on principles of justice in its foundations. Even if we're talking about Islamic principle of justice. Why? Because if you base a society primarily on a principle of justice, it means you are building a society which is focused on this world and not on akhirah. The Islamic society is a society which is based on iman bil akhirah. It's a society which is based on ihsan in that way, and not justice. Justice is always secondary. A society based primarily on justice, even those principles, Shari principles of justice, can be called Islamic society formally, but it won't be Islamic society in in a spiritual. So the foundation of Islamic society is ihsan and spirituality as such, and belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the love of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and awliya Allah and mu'mineen, and the brotherhood. It's not based on justice, it is based on brotherhood. Justice is secondary, ihsan is primary. So that's one thing. And the third thing which I mentioned is obviously liberal conception of justice is kufr, is zulm. So we have to clarify which justice, what rationality, as McIntyre say, whose justice and which rationality, or something like that. So these are a few points about his first so-called principle of the well-ordered society. Okay, let's go to the second principle. Actually, I also wanted to add to the first point that the claim that everyone accepts the very same principle is also not true, because Islamic society provides, or at least historically Islamic society provided a socialist space for other sub-societies to exist. And those sub-societies like Jewish or Hindu or Christian, they didn't have to accept the basic principles of Islamic society as such, or at least not on the basis. I mean, they might have accepted it pragmatically or opportunistically, but they didn't have to accept it in the first sense, for example. So the second point is society's basic structure, that is political and social institutions, are publicly known. That is, public believe that they embody the principles of justice mentioned in the first principle of a well-ordered society. But if Islamic political and socialist institution and its basic structure of Islamic society is not based primarily on principles of justice, then that rule doesn't follow. But I think we can, for the sake of argument, we can accept that Islamic society, probably it is publicly known as Islamic society based in the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, love of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the brotherhood of mu'mineen and mu'minat. So those institutions are well known, but they are not equally known, because mu'mineen have darajat. Minhum zalimun wa minhum muqtasidun wa minhum sabiqun. At least there are three categories which Quran mentions. So there's much to quibble or question in this principle as well, but I just want to go through all three, so I will just move on. So in a well-ordered society, citizens, so firstly, in Muslim society there are no citizens. Muslim is not a citizen anyway. So effective sense of justice, so citizens believe that this basic structures comply with the principles of justice, and which basically mean they are fulfilling their interests. So that's what establishes their loyalty to this society, and that's why society functions as a well-ordered society. But in Islam, your basic loyalty to Islamic society is based on your loyalty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your loyalty to Islam al-Haq. So it's truth, not justice, which establishes the loyalty to Islamic society. But truth obviously is understood at different levels, at those three levels by Mu'mineen. منهم ظالم ومقتصد وسابق بالخيرات. So there's always sort of a contest and tension which society based on interest based society might not have, for example. And obviously Muslim society doesn't bind together or shouldn't bind together, and it's not a Muslim Islamic society to that extent, ideally, if it is just based on mutual fulfilling of interest based on just share of material goods as it is in John Rawls. So I think this covers Rawls's three principles, and I'll stop here and we'll continue from here inshallah next time.